a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
Another episode of Amazing Arizonans, and a guy I've had the privilege of working with now for 4.5 years, and a very well-known name in news in Arizona, Jim Cross. This is fun.
Yeah, been looking forward to this.
I don't think people. I think people. You're the one that people want to know the most around here. I do. I think I get more questions about you when I speak in public. I think because you've been such a voice in the biggest stories people hear, and I think they want to know more about you. So hopefully that's what we're going to accomplish here.
Sure.
Let's talk about your career first. The latest update took us all by surprise. You want to talk about it?
Sure.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay. 25 years here. Great 25 years. Enjoyed it immensely, but there comes a time in this business, and you're a long ways away from that, where you just say, okay, that's enough.
Time to call it a career?
Yep. And going to retire December 7th.
I know that I would imagine you took a lot of time to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And then it was announced at a company meeting, and there was an audible gasp in the room. Any second thoughts after the decision? Once it was out there and now it's official, any second thoughts? Not
really. It was very touching. You were there.
I was there.
I had a very hard time getting through that. They gave me a great belt buckle. What really got me, well, I was already pretty well toast by the time I got up there. But, I gave the speech or whatever, which was really tough. That choked me up a little bit. And then our news director, Martha, had gotten a hold of my daughter and my two grandsons.
Oh, that video.
Yeah. And that got me.
Put you over the top?
Yeah. I mean, she's my favorite person in the world. And then those two kids are, obviously, they're my grandboys. And so, yeah, that was, but no, overall, no. It was time for a change, but I have no regrets at all. I mean, it was 25 great years. I got to do a lot of things and work with some awfully great people.
I want to go through some of those, but I want to almost work backwards. You were recognized by the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, at which I think was obviously a deserved honor. How did that feel to you? Was that did you enjoy that recognition? Was that meaningful for you?
Yes. And it was 2 years ago that I was inducted. It was a culmination of a lot of years doing this. A lot of hard work went in behind it. It didn't hit me immediately. It's obviously an honor to have that award because there are so many fantastic broadcasters in that hall. Mm-hmm. The late Al McCoy.
Yeah.
Many, many others who've worked here.
Yeah. So let me stop everybody. On our wall, we have kind of the history of KTAR, and on the wall by the door coming into the offices is a list of all the Hall of Famers that have worked in this building. It is cool to see your name. It belongs there as an outsider looking at that list. But is it cool for you to see your name on that list? Yeah,
it is, and I was really touched that the company put it up on the wall, along with a display of the major stories that the station has covered going back decades. So yeah, it's a little surreal, to come from where I came from, starting in Idaho. Here's where I ended up at. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool to see it.
Did you, before that company meeting, before the video was shown, before you heard the response of the people in this building, were you aware of how the people in this building felt about your work?
Yes.
It's an amazing thing. I would think as much as your accomplishments on the wall, being recognized as a Hall of Famer, is an industry saying what you've accomplished. But you're loved in this building, and you're respected for the work that you do.
Yeah.
That's amazing stuff.
It is. That's a good feeling. I mean, they always say that no matter what business you're in, if you have the respect or the appreciation of your peers, that's worth more than anything. That makes all the difference in the world. I mean, to kind of go back, a few years ago, I think it was 2018, I got I can't remember what it was, Employee of the Station Award.
Yeah.
And honestly, that meant a lot to me. It's definitely on par with the Hall of Fame, because it meant, there were so many forces involved in the Hall of Fame thing, but this was inside of the station. This was people you've worked with. That meant a lot I had an appreciation. And part of me in the back of my head felt some regret. You asked me about feeling regret. A little bit that I'm leaving, and I don't want to leave. I'm staying through the election. Mm-hmm. Going into December, I felt, I felt like I needed to be here for this. I mean, it's obviously a big event. Everything surrounding it, the presidential race, the Senate race, congressional races, all kinds of things going on. So
the possibility that the legislature, as close as it is, could flip in one or both chambers.
It could. I mean, it's possible. I mean, as you know, there is a lot of divide right now, and it starts on the lower levels of government all the way up to the top. And it's very polarized right now, no matter what the race, no matter what the office. When
you look at that, the other thing about this I wanted to really dive into with you is the changes in the industry. Now, I'm a latecomer. I've been doing this full-time for 15 years.
You'd never know it.
But, I've been doing this full-time for 15 years, and even I have noticed the significant changes in our industry. Yeah. But when you started here at KTAR, the radio was the news. You were the people consumed the radio, and that was the only way to find them. Yes. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. We didn't have videos in your hands. Do you like the changes?
Yes and no. I like the technology changes a lot, because the things we can do on a computer now in 5 minutes, if that, would take us 30 minutes to an hour to do back in 99 or, up a few years after that. It was very challenging. We had these things called reel-to-reels.
Yeah.
We had cart machines, which are, for people that aren't aware of it, it's kind of basically an 8-track. But you would put your stories on that. You would put the commercials on that. I like the technology changes. The business changed. I mean, radio has... I've been in it since 1980. It's changed tremendously. There were big changes in the 80s, big changes in the 90s. But, over the last few years, it's kind of snowballed, and it's rapidly changing. And honestly, in many ways, for the better.
Your job for so long was bringing life to what people couldn't see.
Yeah.
You're known for covering the wildfires around Arizona, and people turn to you as the expert in that regard. Now you've had the ability, when those things happen, you can also show them and narrate what's happening. Do you like that ability where people can actually see what you're seeing?
Yes. I mean, that was something that ingrained in you very early on in broadcasting. It's called the theater of the mind. Mm-hmm. The listeners, television, they have the video. Radio, you've got to paint a picture of, for example, if you're on a fire, what does it look like? How close is the fire to a community or homes? Evacuating people. One of the more interesting evacuees I talked to was a few years ago. Crown King got evacuated north of Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And about 2:00 in the morning, I was at a high school gym. I think it was in Dewey Mare. And a lady pulled up in her big truck, and her entire front of that truck was filled with cat and dog carriers. The entire bed had animal carriers. And she had evacuated from Crown King with everything, her pets. She left one thing behind. There was her husband. I said, where's he at? He stayed up there, and he's running around the house with a bulldozer. It's people like that. You always hear about acreage, and people say, well, it's not a big fire. Well, it doesn't make it. It's location.
Sure.
But you meet these people, and you feel for them because they're scared to death. It's like what we're seeing in the Southeast right now with the flooding. I mean, there's nothing worse than losing your home or the threat of losing your home. A lot of people I've seen in fires, they've lost everything they had. And they didn't have that much in some cases. So, yeah, you really feel for them.
The devastation, my introduction, I think we've talked about this before privately. My introduction to the fires in Arizona was early when I moved here in the 90s, the Rodeo and Chediscott fire.
Yeah.
And the devastation that happened, but also the devastation that was averted by the hard work of the firefighters. The town of Show Low was very close to being overrun.
Very close. I'll tell you a story about that. We were in Show Low, I believe it was on a Sunday afternoon. The fire was just west of us, mile, maybe 2 miles out. You could see the fire, and the fire guys told me it was about 55 stories high. It hit what's called a jackpot, which is basically a bunch of logs piled up. They were eventually going to burn later. And once it hit the jackpot, it pumped up enough heat, it popped a hole in the inversion and allowed some of the heat to go out, and the flames kind of came down. But we were within minutes probably of being forced out of Show Low. The fire was just barreling in on there. It was scary for everybody, the firefighters, the reporters that were up there, TV and radio. But they came dangerously close to that fire, at least getting into part of Show Low and possibly into Pine Top Lakeside.
Yeah, I was going up to announce the rodeo in Show Low and Springerville and the 4th of July weekend. And they weren't sure that those rodeos were going to happen. And I remember driving up when we got the all clear and seeing some of the fire equipment coming down, not knowing what to expect.
Yeah.
But then they had the 4th of July parade. And the response from the people of Show Low and that parade when the fire trucks were going by was overwhelming, because that town was still in shock from how close they came to losing everything. They
did, certainly on the west side of town. I don't know how deep, if it would have made it that far, how deep it would have gone in. But that was, one of the worst fires I've ever been on. And I've been on fires since '87 in Idaho, but that fire, it started off as 2 fires. One, the rodeo fire was started by a firefighter looking for work.
Yep.
He spent some time in prison. The other fire, the Chetasky fire, was started by a lost hiker. And they were miles apart, and there was concern they would merge, but you kind of went, okay, still got some room in between them. But the winds kept pushing those fires closer together, and they merged eventually to become a mega fire. And, they had thousands of firefighters and air tankers and helicopters and everything they could throw at these fires. They ended up losing somewhere 400 to 500 homes and businesses, but it could have been a lot more than that. There were towns, outside of the Show Low area that really took a big hit.
And that's where I know it had to be challenging for your job, because as an observer driving up from the valley through Payson and making my way up north, and the beautiful forest that you see, and then getting to Heber and Overgard, and just seeing the massive devastation and still smoldering, it was shocking to witness.
Yeah.
Total devastation of what was happening.
Yeah, that area took a big hit, Heber Overgard area. And again, a situation where without the hard work of the firefighters, it would have been a lot worse. This fire was growing by tens of thousands of acres a day. It was extreme fire behavior. But they were able to finally, get a handle on it. But it was one of the roughest firefights these guys have ever been on, probably.
I was at the time at a different radio station and was asked by and I'm not joking here. The website's called The Blaze. It's Glenn Beck's website. I was associated in doing his national fill-in work, and they wanted me to describe what happened with the Yarnell Hill fire. And they asked me to write a piece for them. So we went out. I was living at I-17 north of Jomax, almost to the Carefree Highway at the time. And we went as they brought the remains back from Maricopa County Coroner's Office back up north. And we were on the freeway overpasses. And I thought I was just going to go and watch this happen, and I would be mostly by myself. The overpasses all the way north were jam-packed with people wanting to pay their respects. But I was not there. I was not in the town. What was that experience like? With all of your experience in working with and knowing the people that fight these fires, what was that like for you?
Shocking. I went up there on a Sunday afternoon. I had just gotten back from Idaho, I think on the Friday before. Was trying to rest up to go back to work on Monday, and that fire happened, and I had a friend up there who was a reporter, and she called me and said, they can't find the guys. They've lost them, and DPS's helicopters are looking for them right now. And I called one of my fire commander friends, and he said, if you're coming up here, you better get up here now. And I started going up there, and I hit those mountains, 89A, when you come down out of Prescott. And I remember looking off in the distance, I don't know, it was 30 miles or whatever it is, and it was so bright off the fire that it looked like the lights of Phoenix. And this was 9 or 10 o'clock at night. The closest we got when we initially arrived was about 13 or 14 miles away, and it was snowing ash on us to where they moved us back a mile or two beyond where we were at. And later that night, I think it was about 11 o'clock or midnight, they confirmed that they had lost 19 firefighters. One survived, who was a lookout, but they had lost 19, Prescott firefighters that were members of the Granite Mountain Hotshot crew, and it was stunning. That was the biggest loss of firefighters' lives since 1933. Biggest loss of firefighters, period, since 9/11. It's one of the worst disasters that's ever hit the state. It was not a large fire, kind of going back to it's not the size, it's the location.
Correct.
They were trapped in a canyon. The fire pinned them in the back of this horseshoe canyon, basically. There was no way out. It melted their equipment, chainsaw and all that stuff, their radios. And it was a situation where there was a thunderstorm. The fire was going in the direction initially that they wanted it to go. And there was a thunderstorm about 30 miles away, and it turned the wind around on them and pinned them in the back of that canyon. And that's where they died. And I was in there a few weeks later, and there was nothing in there probably taller than 3 or 4 inches. But when they were in there, it was brush taller than we are, much taller, bone dry, fire everywhere, a lot of wind, very bad firefighting conditions, about the worst imaginable.
Is it difficult, and I hope this isn't too personal, the question, in doing that for so many years and getting to know the firefighters, the men and women that do this work, when you have to be professional, when you have to cover it as a reporter, but yet I know it feels personal, is it difficult for you to remain professional, or is part of it showing the emotion and the humanity in your reporting?
You definitely showed the emotion. I mean, there were times I was doing reports, and it was one of the times, thankfully, that I wasn't on video, that you would choke up when you were doing the report. And over the air, it didn't sound like you were choking up, but you were in your head, because I've been around wildfires for so long, in your head, and I've gone to the Wildfire Academy in Prescott and taken the courses up there. You were trying to visualize what they were looking at. And my imagination of what they had saw before they were penned will never go away. I mean, this is something I'll carry with me the rest of my life. It's probably the most hard-hitting incident I've ever had to cover. It was a tragedy. I mean, it was weather dominated. They were helpless in that canyon, and they died as a result of it.
Yeah, it was a shocking story. When you got into this career, maybe I should ask it this way: how did you decide on this career, and did you ever imagine it would take the course that it did to get you to where you are now?
No. When I started in radio in 1980, I was working in a little mom and pop Idaho radio station. I was 18, 19 years old, and when you're that age, all you want to do is spin the records and the rock and roll and party and meet girls and the whole bit. About 5 years after I started, the owner of the company that hired me, was the first guy that ever hired me, gave me a chance in radio, took me out to lunch, and he said, "We want to make you a news person." And this was in 85. And I said, "Nah, not interested." And he goes, "Well, think about it." I go, "No, I want to stay, playing the hits." Well, in 1995, after a stint in country radio, which was fun, that was a great time to be in country radio. It was early to mid-90s.
Yeah.
So in 95, I said there was a job opening in Kingman. And I said, I think I want to take a swing at that. Went down to Kingman, worked there for about 4.5 years. Had a lot of fun. Nice people up there. A lot of stories came out of Kingman, including the first story I ever covered, which happened 3 days after I got to Kingman, which was the Oklahoma City bombing.
I knew that's where you were going.
And the boss at the station called me. I was at the motel. It was that afternoon. And he goes, you got to come back to the station. The FBI's in town looking for John Doe 2. They had already nabbed McVeigh, the bomber.
Yep.
And that from there spun off to he was working at a hardware store up there. I won't mention the name, but he was working at a hardware store. McVeigh was. He was a stock clerk or whatever. One of his friends was an accountant there. And so that's where it kind of began to unravel. And the FBI showed up en masse that night. And I remember there was a reporter from the newspaper up there, and FBI made it really clear, no pictures. And she snapped a picture, and he grabbed the camera and pulled the film out of it, and through the camera, he goes, no pictures. And at this point, I knew this is very, very serious. And for the next several weeks, it was FBI searching multiple cities, looking for any connections, and I feel bad still. Kingman took a bad rap.
Yeah.
Because they didn't deserve that. McVeigh was not from Kingman. He just happened to land there because his buddy lived there, and I think they were in the military together. And so, yeah, Kingman and the surrounding area, it was really an unfair hit that they took from the national media.
But did that story, the significance of that story, is that what kind of gave you the passion and say, man, I want to tell these stories?
It was unlike a lot of, anything I'd ever covered up until that point. I'll tell you a quick story. There was a FBI agent who's since retired, and he knew that I'd only been there like 3 days. And the news guy that had been there for years was just destroying me. And he noticed that. And he wouldn't tell me what was going on, but he would certainly point me in the right direction, which to this day I will never forget, because FBI, like I said, he didn't give up anything, but he gave me enough to go off of to where I wasn't getting stopped by this other reporter who did a fantastic job on it. I'll give him credit. It was Dave Hawkins that was up there. Tremendous news guy. And then a couple of years later, I was in on a Saturday morning, early, a big monsoon storm. I don't know if I've ever seen rain as hard as I saw in Kingman that morning. And I was sitting at the station about 3:30 or 4 o'clock, and I had the scanner on. And I hear Amtrak derailment east of Kingman.
Wow.
And so it had derailed. About that storm was it took a bridge east of Kingman out. Basically, it sunk. But when the Amtrak was going east, the bridge had come down like this on this side, so the Amtrak could go over. If it had gone down on this side, it would have slammed right into it at about 80 or 90 miles an hour. But that took days to sort through that. That was interesting to cover. Oklahoma City was obviously a big national, worldwide story. The Amtrak was a big national story. Did a lot of work for ABC on that. That was interesting. But and then you just, over the years, you do story after story, and a lot of them you forget, but there's certainly ones you'll never forget.
What would you consider? I know it's hard. It may be hard to narrow down to one, maybe not. The biggest story outside of the fires you've covered. What's the biggest story you've covered, or a couple of the biggest stories that you covered that you thought, obviously what you talked about with Timothy McVeigh, but what are some of those stories that you thought, this is significant, this is a big story? Tucson
shooting rampage back in January of 2011. We were at home. It was a weekend. We learned that Gabby Giffords had been shot, survived amazingly. believe it was 6 people that died. There were several that were injured.
Federal judge. 10-year-old girl, 8-year-old girl, wasn't it?
Yeah, Christina Taylor Green. Yeah. And we got to Tucson. We sent 4 reporters down there, and I ended up outside of the shooter, Jared Loeffner's house. And somebody there said, "You want to talk to the little girl's uncle?" And his name was Greg Segolini. And we went over there, and he brought out a picture of the little girl. And it was that and a portrait. Beautiful little girl. Dallas Green, remember Major League Baseball manager? It was his granddaughter. And that was tough when you put a face to, but you had, victims of all ages, men, women. Giffords was a very popular Arizona congresswoman.
She was. On both sides of the aisle, she was very well respected.
And the little girl died. She adored Giffords. The little girl did, and so she wanted to go. It was called, I believe, Congress on the Corner event. It was outside of a Safeway in Tucson, and the little girl wanted to meet her, and she went, and she ended up getting killed. The days that followed that, though, we had the governor there, we had senators coming in.
I was there for the memorial service at the arena on campus.
Yeah.
And that was such a, that whole scene for us driving down, because I was not there when you were there, I was there later, was such a moving tribute and a moving scene. That entire area seemed to just still be stunned.
Yeah, the hospital, the memorial outside the hospital, the flowers, it was massive. I mean, I don't know how many square feet. It was big, just huge. Mm-hmm. But I think, that it shocked so many people, because, violence like that, senseless. There was no rhyme or reason to it. You've got 6 people dead, a bunch of others hurt. It was a miracle that Gifford survived. She was shot essentially point blank.
And the questions then about the shooter, about Jared Loeffner and his mental state, and how people had been warning and people had been talking about his mental health, and that conversation then about why didn't we do something, what can you do? I was happy that the focus seemed to be on the victims.
Yes.
That it seemed like the national media for a very brief moment wanted to talk about him, but in the end, the conversation was where it should have been, about the loss.
Yes. The loss, like I said, you felt it nationally, worldwide, because it had put Tucson in the spotlight, and there was no rhyme or reason for, until you found out more about his mental state later. But it was surreal being outside of his house for a couple of days, along with, rows of national TV trucks. The parents had basically fortified themselves inside of the home. They never pulled the curtains. They didn't open the door. They stayed inside. We never saw them.
When you, one of the things I like about working in this building, and I wonder if you like it as much as I do, is how this company brings in interns from ASU, young blood, young people, anxious to learn. Do you like that atmosphere?
Yeah. I think they've learned from me some of the tricks of the trade. Excuse me.
Do you like teaching them? Do you like sharing that?
I do. Sometimes I feel like old man on the mountain, but in fairness, I've learned as much from the younger people, especially on some of the technology stuff, that they have skills that I didn't have or don't have. I have some skills that they don't have. So it works well. It's a good balance.
But there's something about your approach, and I think that's why so many people are intrigued by you. Is I've been listening to you for years, but I've known you now for 4 years or so. You never make yourself the story, but the expectation is, if it's happening and it's big, that it's going to be your voice that tells the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. That's it's good that people trust you, and I've tried to always stay center on things. You don't go bias on anything. You don't go left, right, whatever. You tell the story. You don't throw your opinion on the story. We all have our opinions on stuff. But you keep it. Let the listeners decide. I mean, let them put the story out there, give them the best possible information, and let them decide how they feel about things.
People are smart. They figure it out.
Oh, yeah. Listeners are smart.
When you, one of the things that I remember was one of the first big things that happened while I was here was when, was it 9 or 10 Phoenix police officers injured at one scene?
Yes. Southwest Valley.
Yeah, in the Southwest Valley. And I remember you being there and describing it, but I remember having a conversation with you about it. Can you talk about that? Can you talk to me about a scene like that kind of injury? And you were, for a short time, weren't you guys pretty close to what was going on?
Yeah, I think more so some of the TV people. They had us, they have the big command van for Phoenix Police. They kind of had us tucked in behind it because the guy was in a neighborhood kind of around the corner from where we're at, but he was shooting. One of the TV guys, one of the camera guys, got the sound of one of the bullets going past him. You could hear the, I don't know how close the bullet was. So, yeah, you knew you were, until they had this guy in, under arrest and custody. That was an interesting situation, and that he had basically ambushed them. He had put I believe, a baby outside in a carrier and opened the door, and as soon as the police walked up, he opened fire.
Wasn't he trying to entice one of the officers into the house with the intention of shooting him in the head in the house?
That, as I remember, that's the case, yeah.
And then the cop was so kind of savvy to what was going on, and he ended up taking a round and severe injuries to his shoulder, but survived. And then in the shootout that happened, I saw some video of that. That's the part of these stories that I wish I could tell the way you do, in this sense. Everything I do is opinion. So you either agree with me or disagree with me. Yeah. But with you, you're able to tell a story where it's not I disagree with him or I disagree with him. They just like the way you tell the story.
I just try to I had a boss one time told me, a news guy, in fact, the news director here back in the early 2000s, he said, okay, listeners, a lot of cases, they'll be tuned in and listening to your art. And a lot of cases, they're only about halfway listening. So when you're telling a story, imagine you're going down a dirt road in a pickup with the windows down and you can't hear a thing and you're trying to get the message across to them. And if you can drive it home early, you can capture their attention. And I just and I don't, I don't use a lot of big language, or I'd make it as simple as I can. Personally, I like telling stories like that to make it easy for people to digest, and not having to have an opinion, because news people, we really can't. It makes it in a lot of ways a little easier. There's times, you've been on stories and, oh yeah, you'd like to give an opinion, and you're going, oh no, don't do it. So,
well, one of the guests on this podcast is a name you'll recognize that just thinks the world of you, is Holmberg.
Love Holmberg.
And Holmberg loves to do your voice.
Yeah, pretty well, too.
What Holmberg catches is this kind of, because they blow everything up with an impression.
Yeah.
So it's almost like everything you do, you take in stride. There's none of this that gets you. I go over the top. I talk too fast. You have this delivery, and Holmberg gets this. Yeah. All right, here I am standing outside at 4 a.m, and he gets the voice and the affect down so well. Do you like that? I mean, do you?
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I was a story in the East Valley somewhere. Now one of the TV trucks pulled up, and he pulls up next to me. He goes, "Turn on Holmberg. Why? He's imitating you." And I'm like, oh boy. And he was really over the top on that one. A few months ago, I think you brought my attention. He was impersonating me. I sat there and I listened like 2 or 3 times, and I was literally in tears. I had water running down my face going, well, it pretty much sounds like me, but boy, did he nail the mannerisms.
Yeah.
And so it's like, Yeah, I mean, it was flattering. And, and Holmberg's he does so many different voices, and he's so good at it. And
he's a good guy. He's a very nice guy. So nothing he ever says is meant as an insult. It's always in good fun.
Yeah, he's uber talented.
Oh, he is. He's immensely talented. So let's finish up with this question. Legacy. You have obviously Hall of Famer, the people in this building, but how would you like the public to remember you? How would you like your career to be remembered, or you to be remembered here in this valley? Because you've been such a big part of it for so long.
That I had a really good command of the state, and that I studied this state. I mean, I love this state. I've lived here longer than I've ever lived anywhere, almost 30 years now. And I'd lived in Idaho and Washington and Tennessee and Guam and California, Nevada. Yeah, I think that's the end of the list. Love the state, love its history, love the people. Just that I was fair with people and that I was honest and that I tried to be as credible as I could be and to be as, truthful with everything. That's more or less, I don't remember it's there's some people that say a legend, super, that's all well and fine. I just want to be remembered as a normal guy who did news and had respect of people and inside and outside of the building.
I would say if that was your goal, it is certainly mission accomplished on all of those, because that's how I would describe you to people. And I've only known you a short time comparatively. I've been listening to you, but to get to know you, I think that would be the person that I would describe. So I'll ask one last thing, and if it's too personal, you can tell me none of my business. What's next? When you leave here and you're done, do you have plans for what's next? Can you share them? If you don't want to share them, you don't have to.
To tell you the truth, I'm going to sit around for 2 months and probably look back from time to time on everything that happened over the last 3 decades in this state, and I'll smile about it. And in some ways, we talked about it earlier, there will be stories that I will never be able to shake. The Gifford shooting, the Yarnell, the chopper crash that killed the 4 journalists in downtown Phoenix. That was very painful.
School Park.
Yes. Oklahoma City bombing. I'll remember the fun stories. And I got to be honest, the most fun I ever had on a story was the blizzard in Flagstaff in January of 2010. We went up there knowing we were going to get trapped because this was a mammoth storm. We were basically stuck in Flagstaff for 3 days. I went on ride-alongs with DPS and ADOT snowplow drivers and went up to a snow bowl and interviewed skiers. And one night it snowed 3 feet. And I had shoveled the truck off before I went to sleep for 3 or 4 hours and got up the next morning and I'm like, oh boy, and to where the guy at the motel was helping me shovel it off. That was an absolute blast. That was a lot of fun. That was one of the more fun stories I've ever covered. But yeah, I mean, I would do this all over again in a heartbeat. It was, there was some painful stuff, but boy, there were some really good times. I had a good time.
Well, when you write the book, I want an autographed copy.
Okay.
All right.
And likewise, I'm sure.
Okay.
So, but.
Well, listen, I appreciate the time. I know for the people that don't know, you get here at dark 30 every day.
Love it.
At what time do you get here in the morning?
Well, 1 or 2.
Okay, 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And so we tape this thing at noon.
Yeah.
So this is your 13-hour day already.
Yeah. I mean, it's the business. It's fun.
By the time you get done, it'll be a 13-hour day.
Yeah, more or less. I can always sleep tonight.
That right there, that response, that is the culmination of everything you've done on the air. It is what it is. Yeah. I appreciate the time.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.
All right, listen, Jim Cross is a true legend in this building and in journalism, and it's been a privilege, and it's why we do these podcasts. So thanks for watching.